Welcome to Relationscapes. I'm journalist Blair Hodges, and I'm mapping the stories and ideas that shape who we are and how we connect with each other in order to build a more just world. Our guide in this episode is author Karl Dunn.
What I did love about being married was when you have a ring on your finger, you are now in the married club. It is like the highest level of the video game you can reach in society. The kudos you get for being married is incredible. I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
When gay couples in America finally won the right to marry, Karl thought he'd beat the game at last. He had a husband and a beautiful home in LA and a top job in the global advertising industry. And then everything fell apart. And not just his marriage, but also his carefully crafted sense of self. Karl quickly learned how modern divorce law was definitely not built with gay couples in mind, and it looked like game over. And then something unexpected rose from the ashes. Karl embarked on a fearless journey across continents and through his own inner landscapes, from Los Angeles to Berlin, from breakdowns to breakthroughs. In his memoir, How to Burn a Rainbow, Karl Dunn beckons us toward the fire, to question the roles we've been handed, to think about how to make marriage and divorce more equal, and to imagine what liberation might look like when we stop chasing perfection. Karl joins us to talk about all of this and more right now. Karl Dunn, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you so much for having me on, mate.
I'm excited to talk about this memoir because it takes readers on a really personal journey, but you also pay a lot of attention to the legal and practical and emotional components of gay divorce. And you're asking big questions about the institution of marriage itself. And it was actually kind of tricky to find a book about gay divorce, so congratulations on being one of the few. Maybe not congratulations on the whole divorce thing, or maybe congratulations on the whole divorce thing. But yeah, this is a book that I think you said you were searching for and couldn't really find, so it's one of the reasons you wrote it.
Exactly, yeah. When my divorce first kicked off, I went looking for a book on gay divorce and I couldn't find one. And I was doing these, 2 a.m. deep dive web searches. I could barely find an article on it. And, I started keeping a video diary of sort of revelations and realizations that I was having. And I showed a few to a friend of mine who's in the book, actually, Brian. And Brian was the one who said, okay, y'all need to put this in a book, Queen. And yeah, and then here we are 6 years later.
6 years later. And so your book opens on your honeymoon. This is the scene that we see when we first meet you in the book. It's a beautiful European vacation. You're with your partner, Gunnar. But it's also a troubled scene because at this moment, you're already thinking about divorce.
Well, the day before, my husband and I had an incredible fight on the street in Vienna. And I think everybody has seen this. Like, you're on holiday and you see some couple just ripping each other to pieces and you're like, ooh, take it home, guys. But there I was, on the street just losing my mind. And we'd had a huge disagreement for me, it was about respect.
Yeah.
It was absolutely about respect. And also something that I had not resolved before we had gotten married. My ex-husband and I had an open relationship. And I felt somehow that was meant to be different after we were married. Don't ask me how it was meant to be different.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what I would say is I couldn't have answered that at the time. But now you realize after the passage of time, was my own jealousy about the fact that he had basically unexpectedly gone and hooked up with someone else without telling me and just left me sitting in a cafe for an hour.
Yeah, you think the honeymoon would be like maybe a time to not explore that aspect of the relationship?
Yeah, you'd think so. But, what I also talk about in the book is that in the dynamic that played out between us was something that I was 50% responsible for. Whatever dynamics are happening in any relationship, the two people in it are equally responsible for it. But I was not as sentient as that at the time. So instead, I had Once I realized he wasn't in a hospital and we had a screaming match on the street, I went back to the hotel, got another room, and I basically had stayed there for a couple of days. I hadn't left the room, and I'm thinking very seriously about leaving him. That's where the book opens.
I'm going to have you read a little section here on the crisis of identity that you began to go through as a result of thinking about divorce and then going through a divorce. So I'll have you read this crisis of identity section on page 46.
Sure thing. Yeah, this is a year later after the opening incident. We've had a pretty good 6 months and then a not good 6 months. And the divorce has already kicked into gear. Mm-hmm. And I've met up for coffee with a friend of mine. So this section is called The Crisis of Identity. On the weekend, I had coffee with an Australian friend called Rooney, Roo for short. I know what you're thinking, an Aussie called Roo, but let's move on. Roo and I had met during my screenwriting days at Australians in Film in LA. It had been a while since we'd seen each other, and there was a lot of news to catch up on. We sat in a quiet cafe in Venice Beach we used to meet at, surrounded by screenwriter hopefuls tapping away on keyboards in the shade of palm trees painted on the cafe walls. I gave Roo what was becoming a very well-rehearsed speech about Gunnar and the divorce. He made all the right noises in all the right places, giving me my fix. Roo himself had also been going through quite a few life changes with the birth of his first child. What was it like when you found out the news? I asked. Mate, the whole universe changed, said Roo, smiling. I bet, yeah. What was the biggest thing? I was expecting him to say he'd been wondering whether to marry his girlfriend or figure out whether to stay in the States or head home to Australia, or maybe whether to sell his car and get a family wagon. I had to figure out who I was, Roo told me. At my perplexed look, he explained. The day she told me the news, I realized that I've basically lived my entire life as an overgrown boy. In 9 months, I was going to be a role model to a little human. I had to figure out what I stood for, what values I wanted to pass on to her. In a nutshell, what kind of man I was. And I found out that I didn't have a clue. I think you're selling yourself a bit short, mate, I countered. You've always had a pretty good handle on what you're doing in life. The filmmaking, the bi-coastal life, that's just all surface nonsense. Everything that I thought was important wasn't, and everything I thought wasn't important was. How do you mean? I asked. Bruce smiled. I've spent my whole life comparing my insides to everyone else's outsides. How I felt was based on how everyone else seemed, and that is a crappy way to figure yourself out. So I just got quiet, went internal, deep down, because no one else can tell me who I am. I have to. How's it going? I asked Roo. Takes time. Longer than 9 months, he laughed. But I'm on my way. Roo was renewed, clear-eyed. For a guy who'd devoted a big part of his life to the study of martial arts and the spiritual side of it, he was centered in a way I'd never seen before. As I left, I thought about all my straight male friends who'd gone through what Rooney had. I was also an overgrown boy and a validation junkie who had spent his life chasing the next job, the next title, the next city, the bigger income, industry fame, clothes, and new men, all with the promise of a contentment that I never felt. It was infantile, Peter Pan-ish. I ended up driving all the way down to Venice Beach and parking near the sand. I took off my shoes and walked to where the water lapped the beach. Staring off into the horizon and listening to the waves, I made a decision. I may not have been having a kid, but, I thought to myself, why couldn't my divorce be my crisis of identity? I could use it to dig down and figure out who I was. Tired of running from myself and looking for anything or anyone else to make me feel good, I made a promise. I would do the work. I didn't care how much it hurt. If I was going to go through this, I wanted to come out the other side a far, far better man. I just had no idea how I was going to do it. But I had to start somewhere. Holding up my left hand, I looked at my ring. I remembered the day that I proposed to Gunnar under the dappled forest light of Muir Woods, thinking it would be the greatest thing I'd ever do in my life. We were so happy that day. I kissed the ring once, slid it off my finger, and tucked it into my pocket. I thought of that old Buddhist quote, that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Then I turned toward the shore and started to walk.
That's Karl Dunn reading from his book, How to Burn a Rainbow. My gay marriage didn't make me whole, my divorce did. And Karl, you started to walk here. And in this scene, you were alone after speaking with a friend. But through much of the book, you weren't alone. I'm thinking about all the friends, the people that you were surrounded with, the people you encountered throughout the journey that you introduced us to. And you say that at the beginning of the divorce process, your friends that you already had kind of started getting sorted into these different camps in response to the divorce.
It was quite a revelation, actually, about friendship and what friendship really means. There were people who were definitely Team Karl in this divorce.
Ride or die.
And ride or die. And, these are the Brian Milers, the Uli Lutzenkirchens, the other characters that I talk about in the book. And then there were people who were Team Gunnar. And, I had to respect that they had chosen a side. And a lot of it was not a surprise. Although, what I will say is there was one person who I thought had gone Team Gunnar and actually had not at all. I had basically just kind of disappeared from our life, our friendship, and he was hurt by that. And I was reading between the lines and not getting it. And it isn't until the end of the book that I actually figured out he was just heartbroken that our friendship just disappeared out of nowhere. So you also have to be a little careful, if you find yourself in that situation yourself. Not everything you think is real. And then there were friends like Ludo in the book, who I thought it was an excellent model of friendship when someone has been a friend of a couple, where he said, I will give you exactly the same advice that I'm going to give Gunnar, and I will not tell him anything that you tell me, and vice versa, so don't even think about asking. And I was like, wow, that struck me as a very good model of friendship. And then there's the binge watchers. Category 4, and you got to watch out for them because they're the ones who are living for the drama of your divorce and stoking the flames of it. And you have to be very careful because what I found out is there were a few people who were not just talking to me, but also talking to Gunnar. And I thought they were just talking to me. And then when you discover, hang on a minute, what did I tell this person and what did they tell him? Yeah, those ones I had to cut out pretty quickly, but they make themselves known pretty fast. They're a little too hungry for all the details.
Yeah, you also described the people who maybe wanted to care but didn't really have the bandwidth to do it. That's a tricky category too. I mean, my heart goes out to folks like that. Maybe they're dealing with their own stuff or whatever.
Yeah, marriages and divorces bring up a lot of emotions for people. And some people there were people who did not turn up to our wedding for various reasons. And there were people who couldn't be around for our divorce. And I get it. Like, at the time it hurt.
Sure.
But later on I realized, no, I get it because everyone's going through it in some way in their life, like whatever it may be in their life, not necessarily a divorce, but any life event. And, you can't be mad at people who just can't be there at that point,
And then there's kind of a new group of friends arising. These are the new people that you met after you and Gunnar had got married and things started to fall apart. And John Hare is one of these folks. This is a crucial person in the book.
Yes.
And this is someone that you met totally by chance in Berlin. And it actually happened on that honeymoon. You kind of took a break from the honeymoon and met this guy who became sort of a guru, also a romantic flame in some ways that he held out for, also sort of a mentor of sorts and a friend, but also a complicated friendship. What was it like writing so much about John Hare? Because he plays such an important part in your story.
Yeah. Look, John changed my life. There's no doubt about it. And he is an absolutely fascinating human being. And it was really wild writing about him because when I started the book, we were very much friends, very tight. It was difficult to understand what our relationship actually was. But like you mentioned, the biggest and most lasting effect for me was the mentorship, what I describe in the book as being almost like a Yoda and Luke relationship. And I don't think I've met another person in my life who is so wise, so willing to help. But what became apparent is that John functions by having people as projects. And the moment, it's interesting, it's a pattern I think that repeats in his life is that, and you'll see it happen in the book with me and with other people, that the moment you start getting right and the relationship levels out, that's when he feels out of his depth, because the status part of it is very important for him to maintain.
It's important because you show that like heroes can self-sabotage. Like there's no perfect heroes. And I think as soon as we start pedestalizing someone in our life, it gets really tricky because that pedestal can crack and things can fall apart. So
yes. And I was incredibly damaged when I met him. I was a mess, a hot mess, and was only too willing to accept the help of someone who seemed to have a boundless amount of it to offer. But I put an incredible amount of pressure on him as well. And, you know, we had breaks, like very huge fights and breaks in our friendship during the book because I leaned on him pretty hard. And I think in many ways was almost trying to cannibalize his life experience to make up for all the time that I felt I had lost, or all the journey that I hadn't walked yet, and was kind of hoping maybe there's a magic pill. Like consuming him in some way would get me there. And I think also, you know, I'm a little bit competitive and, you know, wanted to feel better fast. So, you know, I was throwing a lot of this at him. And also, you know, there's the savior complex. He definitely appeared like a savior. And there was definitely that element to it as well.
You mentioned his wisdom, and this was really important, the way that he would have these conversations with you. And at first it was through text message, you would exchange messages, and then you ended up going out to Berlin and living in the place where he was at. One of these conversations really stands out. He asked you just point blank why you got married, and you discovered in that moment, you kind of had the surface level reasons, but John wasn't looking for that. He was looking for something deeper. So maybe mention kind of what the surface level reasons you would have given, and then digging into those deeper reasons why you even got married to begin with.
Well, the surface level ones were very easy. It was like I had met this man. I was in love with him. I thought we were going to be together for the end of time. We had campaigned hard for marriage equality. And then when it became legal again, it felt almost like we had to do it, you know? And to be honest, I didn't really ask myself many questions about why I was doing it. I just kind of fell into it. You know, I think in a way that heterosexual couples, if they're together long enough, people just start asking, like, when are you getting married? When are you getting married? Like, there's a real societal expectation to just do that. Now that we had the right to, I think we sort of fell into that pattern as well. I won't say that trap, but that pattern. So those were the surface reasons. You know, definitely, you know, because I loved him, wanted to do it for the cause, all of that. But then the darker reasons, which I when I got really honest about why I'd done it, they were not good. And I would say, you know, I had already said, like, I married him because I was in love with him, but you don't need to marry someone to be in love with them. And love is not a byproduct of marriage.
You had a domestic partnership even, so like...
We had a domestic partnership already. And honestly, our legal status didn't really change that much. However, what I did love about being married was that when you have a ring on your finger, that is absolute. And you realize, like, you are now in the married club. And this is, I mean, it is like the highest level of the video game you can reach in society. Because the kudos you get for being married is incredible. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But, and this is the bit that I'm not proud of, is that when I would say my husband to people, which I loved saying, it was definitely on one side, it was an act of love. But it was absolutely an act of protest and also revenge. Because every time I would say it, there was definitely, you know, a pinch or two of, hey, all of you who've taken away our rights since forever, well, we got one of yours. How's that feel? What's that like? You know, and that was definitely part of it, if I'm truly honest. But worse than that, and the absolute worst reason why I got married was because I just was not, I wanted my husband to wave some magic wand and make all of my dark feelings about myself go away.
Insecurity,
the insecurity, the lack of self-esteem, the need for an external validation of going out with him and going, that's right, that's what I've got at home. You know, instead of actually getting right with myself, I put all that pressure on my husband to do it for me. Just terrible.
You also talk about like the fact that society had been oppressive to gay relationships for so long also cultivated in some parts of the gay community a culture of disposable relationships. Like you can't really establish these visible and long-lasting relationships. You have to be careful and private about it. So you also said it's sort of almost an anti-gay, that sort of gay culture thing of saying, I want to reject that, also that culture of disposability. So it involved like gay culture, it involved like your personal insecurities and the need for validation. There was some additional tax breaks you mentioned.
Yeah, well,
And so the deeper, there's all these levels of reasons, and I don't think you can really separate them out, right? It doesn't seem like in the book you can look at them, but they all weave in together to one tapestry of reasons why this relationship exists, and that's why the marriage itself can be complicated. And that's also why the divorce can be complicated, to say nothing of the legal aspects, which we'll get to.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, all those reasons were all intermingled. And, there is definitely a culture in the gay world I can speak of, where there is almost an expectation that your relationships won't last. That said, I have gay friends who are couples who have been together for decades. And that is also common. But the normal experience for many gay men is that you just, tried this one out, it didn't work, tried this one out, didn't work. And so, getting married for me was a way of saying I'm anti-disposable relationships. I'm into committing to one person. And something I will say about marriage was that when I was in it with my husband, I realized that, when we've got a problem, we actually have to fix it. It made me realize that there's points in every one of my last relationships where I stop trying because I'm already planning the end. I've given up. Like, it'll just go on this descent until I reach this point, and I'm like, and I'm out. Whereas, when you're married, you're like, oh, actually, no, we have to fix this. So it actually taught me some great things about being in a relationship with someone and being committed to someone that I learned by being married. Maybe I would have learned those another way. I don't know, but that's how I learned them.
Yeah, and we get to see that kind of epiphany in this book and more over and over. I think, I did the math. There's about 1.5 epiphanies per page. So people that are... No, just kidding. But there's a lot.
Wow.
But the thing I like about your epiphanies, though, is some of them are half-baked. Some of them come back around. Like, some of them you have, but as you keep talking about the head and the heart, like your head might arrive at it, but the heart is slow to catch up. So I wanted to kind of go through some of these. And this is an important one, because earlier you mentioned this 50-50 thing. You wanted to kind of take responsibility for your own part. And I want to caveat that because you're not saying like people in an abusive relationship share a kind of blame or culpability for being abused in a certain sense. You're encouraging people to take agency and see maybe like a person who's being abused might want to take stock of why they're staying in that relationship. And it might be practical. It might be because they can't leave. There might be financial things, or blah, blah, blah. Or it might be because they themselves are just caught up in that cycle and maybe they can take a courageous step and break free from it. So there's this thing called Miriam's Law that you bring up. And I think it speaks to this idea of kind of taking your own responsibility in a relationship. So maybe just take a second to describe what Miriam's Law is.
Well, Miriam is a woman who owned an advertising agency in Berlin that I used to go to work at 5 winters in a row during the 2000s. And that was actually what started my entire relationship with the city of Berlin. So when I leave mid-book to go to Berlin, it's because I have friends there. I have a work history there. So Miriam owned the agency, and I've had that, bust up mid-honeymoon with my husband, and I could think of nothing else to do but go to Berlin, because Berlin was the city that always fixed me. So I went to Berlin. I meet up with Miriam and we have breakfast. And she's got a new agency and a new baby. And I'm like, oh, okay. So what's with the new agency? And then she told me this story about how when she went away on maternity leave and then she came back to her company, her 2 partners had basically made her redundant while she was away.
So gross.
And instead just, I know, it's the worst, like it's the worst man thing like that any man can do. Like she's making life. Yeah. She's over there making life, bro. And you're trying to figure out how to get her out. And
help make the life of the company too. Like she did both.
So I was outraged on her behalf when she was telling me that they wanted to just basically buy her out, which she did. Yeah. She said, yeah, sure, you can buy me out. Yeah. They bought her out and she started a new company. And I was outraged on her behalf. I was like, what were they thinking? And she's like, no, anger's not required, Carl. And then she said to me, I know those boys better than they know themselves. And I knew if I was ever away for any period of time, they would do something exactly like this. So when I found out I was pregnant, I chose to have my baby over my business. And I was like, wow. I mean, she was so matter of fact about it, like just non-emotional at all. And then she said this amazing line. She said, how can I get angry at them for doing exactly what I expected them to do?
Yeah.
I mean, mic drop.
Yeah.
Mic drop. Radical responsibility. She had not a drop of victim in her and she would have had every right to.
Sure.
And anyone listening would have been, what?
Yeah.
But she's just like, no, they did exactly what I thought they were going to do. Not even angry about it. And I just was so blown away. And then I started thinking about that massive fight we'd had in Vienna. And then I realized I'd not only been expecting that, I'd been rehearsing it. Half the things I yelled at him on the street were from a script I'd been rehearsing for years, which means I had created a dynamic with him for him to behave in the way that he had, which meant I was at least 50% responsible for why Vienna happened, and maybe even more. Maybe I had laid the trap. And that was like, okay, I see this. And then the revelations just kept going and going like, hang on, I'd done this with every guy I've ever dated.
Now you're seeing the pattern. And it's like,
yes.
So you call it Miriam's Law. Don't get angry when they do what you expect them to do all along. But that doesn't solve your divorce problems. You've got like a lot more lessons to come. But I think this one gave you space to kind of have those other epiphanies. So that's what I see, like epiphanies kind of like a percentage of an overall epiphany. You just need these little things to kind of take you to the next step. So another component you were wrestling with that you're very candid about in the book, which is helpful and I think vulnerable, is learning how to renegotiate your own sexual self. So you talk about intimacy problems that you experienced through the divorce, about losing confidence, about sexual performance being different, about trying new things and like meeting John Hare and like thinking about other relationships. And that was interesting to see kind of you exploring just practical sexual issues as you're going through divorce.
Yeah, I mean, look, your libido and your sexual confidence will definitely take a beating during a divorce. And I would say also it was a factor in my relationship with my ex-husband, us having I've had open relationships and monogamous ones, and they've both worked and both not worked for different reasons. But in that particular dynamic I had with my ex-husband, I felt like I was in competition with all the other people he was attracted to. So it was not a healthy open relationship in that sense, because it really, I had very little respect for myself in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really did a number on me, and it to the point where, and also meeting John Hare. John Hare is I don't even know exactly what the right word would be. He is such a broad spectrum generalist on sex. He has done and tried pretty much everything there is to do. He does not censor himself. He did not ever deny himself something he was curious about, and he would just walk into everything with this seems interesting, I'll step into this, and here's what I can offer here, and would just do it with absolute confidence. So his sexual explorer extraordinaire lifestyle, for me coming broken and busted out of this, open relationship, was in some ways the worst person to be trying to catch up to in my sort of pre-enlightened competitive self.
And it also could have been exploitative. Like this could have been an opportunity for John Hare to like, oh, here's this vulnerable broken person, let's have some fun here. Like there can be some really scary stuff that happens when you're vulnerable after a divorce.
Oh, definitely there can be. And I will say that he never took advantage of that. We had an interesting relationship that was not really ever particularly sexual. So John definitely was not taking advantage at all of that, broken part of myself. If anything, he was trying to help me grow it, to help me regain confidence, to sort of show me what sex can be by conversation, by, introducing me to people that he had certain relationships with. So he was very much trying to open a door for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. again, it was a process of me foisting that responsibility onto him and not yet at that stage having got right with myself and with my sexual self.
I appreciated that because it didn't seem voyeuristic to me to like learn about your experiences in that regard. Because that's often a more private thing, at least for me and my background. Maybe in gay communities and circles that you've been with, maybe people just talk about it more openly in general, or that's more common. But for me, like, I don't usually make a point of like talking about sexually, even with some of my close friends. You know, it can be tough to talk about.
We definitely in our culture, I think we talk about sex a lot more than the average heterosexual would. I'm sure we do. I base this on no data or statistics, but I think, you know, it's because it's men with men, and every guy, gay or straight, knows how they think about sex, that I think it's much easier for sex between men to be quite transactional and almost like sport in some ways. So, and we talk a lot about it, but I think that's also because our differences to the rest of society are defined by the sex we have.
Yeah.
So I think there's also a kind of unhealthy obsession that the rest of the world has with us. And like, I think promiscuous is a word people like to use for anyone having more sex than them. And, you know, we do have the opportunity to indulge our appetites. So, yeah, I think we talk about it a lot, but also I would say we talk about it very much in terms of conquest, of the hunt, of, you know, our prowess. Talking about how it's not going well or difficulties that you're having, I think is less common. Although I would say amongst millennials who are seeing incredible spikes in anxiety and therefore performance anxiety, I'm actually surprised how free they are talking about the fact that they are on, say, Viagra or the sexual, like the erectile dysfunction problems they're having. They talk about it very, gay, straight, they talk about it very openly in a way that shocks me. So I think the way I speak about it in the book has become very common now in broader society.
And it's an important part of your journey. I'm glad that I learned more from that. There's another big component of the book of lessons that you were learning about emotions, psychological learning. You started really kind of digging into how psychology worked and thinking about primary and secondary emotions. And you started a emotions diary so you could kind of track this. And the diary, you could talk back to yourself through it. So maybe describe this as a great practical tool, I think, for people that might be thinking about divorce or having problems in their relationships or in their marriage. To start something like this emotions diary, what was it? What did it do?
Well, I want to caveat my description of the emotions diary with, it's going to sound like hocus pocus. It's going to sound like some guy trying to start a religion.
It's woo-woo.
But there is a track record of this phenomena in literature already. There's a very famous book called Conversations with God, where a man starts writing questions to God and God answers and he writes the answers down. Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this as well in her work. But basically what I did with the emotions diary was, out of desperation, hitting rock bottom and you know, realizing that my behavior, it's one thing for me to wreck myself with my own destructive divorce behavior, but it was now starting to splash up on other people who hadn't signed up for that. So I thought, okay, mate, you've really got to start figuring out what you're doing and why you're doing it, because it was a mystery to me. So I got a notebook, I cracked it open, and I just started writing down what was going on. And I was writing it down, not really sure where I was going, and then it evolved into a question. So I wrote this question on the page, and then I waited, and then an answer came. And I do not pretend to know who it was that was speaking, if you like, this answer. I don't know if it was the universe, God, my grandmother's ghost, I don't know. But the answer would come, and I would just write the answer out as it was told to me. And then when I would read it, I'd go, oh, 100%, that's exactly what's going on. And it was incredible. I felt like Harry Potter casting his first spell. Because it seemed such a, like, it's still a complete mystery how the emotions diary works, but it works. And I think we need more mysteries in this life. That book became the most important thing in my life. I would leave the house sometimes without my keys or wallet, but I always had that book on me. I always knew where it was. And I was in that book every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, when I was going through something and going, what's going on? And like, I would write, here's what's going on, write the question, wait, the answer would come, and it was always correct. And that is what helped me figure out how I was wired.
I love that 3-step formula. You write down what the thing is, what's happening, what's going on, what happened. Then you ask a question about it, and then you wait, and then what comes. I'll read an example for this because
Please.
the responses that you got some of them are so fascinating and so wonderful, right? So here's one. You had gone out to dinner with an old friend. Nico is their name, and you thought it would just be kind of a fun thing to do, but it didn't go well. So you wrote down what happened. You said, I went out with Nico for dinner. We had a great time, but now I'm avoiding him. But I like him, and I can't figure out why I'm paralyzed here. Why does the idea of calling Nico again feel wrong? So you got it out on the paper. And then the answer here is really, and it's got some great, I'll just read it. It's great. It says, you're looking back to a time you felt safe. You want somewhere to hide, but you can't hide in the past because the past is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. All you have is now. You want yourself and Nico to be the men that you both no longer are. Your shoes are the only time machine you can climb into, and they can walk in only one direction. Nico means you're ready and open for new things, but they have to be what's in front of you, not behind you. That's a remarkable thing.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And I can't lay claim to knowing that before I wrote the question. I didn't know it. It came from somewhere. Again, that's the level of specificity and wisdom that would come from the emotions diary.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking with Karl Dunn, author of How to Burn a Rainbow. And Karl has spent over 2 decades working in advertising in places like Sydney and Singapore and Tokyo and Cape Town and Berlin and Los Angeles. And he's been the global lead on campaigns for Mini Cooper, Levi's, and other companies. He's usually the only LGBTQ plus person in the boardroom, he says. And now he lives between LA and Berlin, working in freelance advertising and also as a keynote speaker on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, self-love, and LGBTQ topics. Again, we're talking about the book, How to Burn a Rainbow. So, Karl, you spent a lot of time learning about marriage history after you became married, and you found out there was a lot that you didn't know about, like why marriage existed and began as a contract with the state, and then later became more of a sacrament. The church got involved. And then there was the rise of companionate marriage, where people started to get married because they loved a partner more than they needed an economic arrangement or to tie households together or whatever. And that history helped you come to terms with why divorce really wasn't working out in any kind of healthy way for you as a gay person. So the rise of no-fault divorce and what you call the battle of the sexes, which is that marriage for so long had disadvantaged women in some ways. Women would leave the workforce. They would usually be home or caring for children, or they wouldn't have the same kind of career advances. Their economic situation was more precarious when divorce happened. And so in the state of California, which is where you got married, they came up with a way to say, we're going to split everything 50-50. So assuming a man and assuming a woman, they're going to take half of everything, and alimony would be paid from one side to the other. But instead of saying men and women, they broke it down by who the higher income earner was. And so without taking...
Exactly.
Yeah, so this is where you got nailed, is you were the higher income earner. And so divorce severely disadvantaged you, and your partner was ready to take you for everything he could.
Yeah, it's those laws which were put into place, signed actually into existence by Reagan, who himself was a divorcee in California. Those laws put in place for those reasons, 100% behind. I mean, there is definitely a sense in divorce law of women and children needing to be protected from the kinds of guys who would just like up and leave their families. And, you know, people in the LGBTQ plus community were well aware of who those kinds of guys are, because they're the ones who would beat us up in high school and write the laws that are against us, you know. But yeah, unfortunately, like what you find when you're going through it as a same-sex couple, either 2 men or 2 women, when you're going through a divorce, you find that the law is really written for, like you say, for like the battle of the sexes, which I have empathy for, but it has nothing to do with us. You know, our marriages are gendered, but in a very different way. But what you see is that the law, the only laws that are in existence, are set up with the presumption that there's going to be a man earning more and there's a woman who is also probably at home with children. So the payment structures are all set up for that dynamic, which of course is usually non-existent in most same-sex marriages and divorces. Of course, some of us have children, but most of us do not. But we pay for it like we do.
That's right. And so the book takes us through the ups and downs of you trying to figure out what to do with your lawyers, and your lawyers were difficult to work with, and the communication between you and your partner had broken down such that you couldn't really come to the table and try to hammer something out, it seems like his lawyers, or maybe him, was really trying to go for everything they could. So he wanted half of everything. And the problem with that is he hadn't really contributed half of what you both ended up with. So there was already an inequality there, and he wants half of that, but you'd already put more into it.
Yes, I had. And the thing I say in my book, How to Burn a Rainbow, is that, he didn't do anything illegal at all. He did only, like, his MO was to follow the letter of the law, to do what the law said he was able to do. So what I seek then is the interesting phenomena that comes out of that for same-sex couples is that your divorces are completely one-sided and based on the pay scale. And it becomes a moral dilemma, I think, for the one who earns less about, well, what do you want to do to your ex? Because they are essentially powerless if they earn more than you. They don't really get a say in what goes on. I felt very much like I had no say in my divorce, absolutely zero. And that's, again, very unusual for us because we're a community of people who've not had the opportunity to get married. So we're also a community of people who have not ever had the laws written to take us into account. So we have a culture of making up our own rules, making up our own norms. So all of my breakups, me and my exes have been able to negotiate what that's going to look like for us. But in this situation, I had zero say. And that is something that nobody, I think, anticipated when we were campaigning for marriage equality.
It was hard to see you learn that lesson in real time because not only were you financially kind of facing Armageddon, but also all the emotional components too. And we get to see the ups and downs of that and the unique kind of losses that you faced as someone who was married as a gay person. So you mentioned earlier the social standing, the sort of the pride in the movement that you were part of, and you were letting all that go. So there was emotional components, there was financial components, and feeling like you were kind of letting down the cause overall. So what would you change? What are some of the biggest changes you'd like to see?
Well, look, I would definitely like there to be a type of divorce reform, not just for myself, but I think for everybody. There are a lot of heterosexuals who are also questioning the entire institution of marriage. Like, why do we actually do this? And the ideas behind divorce law are meant to make it fair. But time has moved on a lot. Society has moved on a lot since these laws were written. So something I propose in the book is not just that people get prenups, like plan for the ending, the very statistical likelihood of your marriage ending, plan for it at the beginning like you would for any end of life scenarios that you would discuss with your partner. I mean, talk about what it might look like if it's going to end and make an agreement between the two of you while you still love each other, as opposed to at the end of it when you hate each other and everyone's gunning for everyone. That is not trying to negotiate fair and equitable resolutions. So I would say do it at the beginning. And honestly, if you have a partner who's not prepared to talk about it, I think that's a warning. Like that is a really serious issue if somebody's not willing to talk about the potential of it ending. And I'd even propose something I call a pre-equitable, where it is more like an operating agreement between two people. And the example I use is like, let's say there's a couple and let's say they even earn the same amounts, but one wants to take a year off and go and study something else to change careers. Like, how should that affect the end of the relationship if they were to part ways? Well, it's nothing to do with us. We don't get a say in that. It's for those two to decide what they think is fair because they're the only two people in that relationship. But unless you prepare in these ways with either a prenup or a pre-equitable, which you could say revisit it at major points in your relationship, you're basically just saying you're letting the government decide it all for you because now you have absolutely no say in it. So I think everybody should be planning for the end of their marriages and doing it, in an adult and loving way with their partners.
Yeah, I thought it was wise that you said do it when you are in that love moment, when you are in that phase of the wonderful phase, when you can't maybe even conceive that it could happen, and treat it as a hypothetical and say, this can be a reflection of how we respect each other today. We don't plan on this happening, but let's say that if it did, what would actually be fair, given what you're giving up, what I'm giving up, what you're bringing, what I'm bringing? Let's think about what fairness would look like, and to treat it as a hypothetical that has legal bearing to it. I think there's a lot of wisdom to that.
I think so too.
You know, Carl, looking at the subtitle of the book, My Gay Marriage Didn't Make Me Whole, My Divorce Did, and I noticed throughout the book your idea of what it meant to be whole changed throughout your experience. And I'm thinking back to something your friend had shared with you. It's one of these quotes on the bottom of a bottle cap, you know, these like inspirational quotes. And it talked about Darwin. It talked about sort of evolution. And it said like, the idea of survival isn't like strength as much as it is adapting. Like a lot of times we think survival of the fittest means like the strongest and whatever, but it's adaptation. That when people can adapt, that's how survival happens. So I wanted to focus on that idea and how it played out throughout your story, because to adapt is an ongoing process, which seems to contradict the idea of being whole, right? But I think your book finds a way to kind of show that that's not necessarily the case. So let's have you read this section called Patience and Perfection.
When am I going to be perfect? That was the question that I've been dogged by most of my life. I was in the process of letting it go, but it was really sticky. Trying to feel perfect was a big driver for why I got married and why I'd worked so hard in my career. Both were wrapped up in the idea that I had to arrive at happiness, that there was an end point, that one day after all this work, I would put my head up and say, hey, I made it. And from then on, life was meant to be one long stretch of contentment. I would unlock the secret to happiness, stick the car on cruise control and spark up the grill for the barbecue that was going to be the rest of my life. Perfection is not a helpful idea. Letting it go was made easier by a few things. First, the bottle cap lid in the Charles Darwin quote. If we were always adapting, then perfection by its very nature is impossible. Everything is evolving and always will. For years in LA before my divorce, I had been seeing a therapist. Perfection was something that had come up often in our sessions. One day, my doctor asked me a shocking question. Karl, have you ever seen a dead body? No. He nodded. You know what strikes you when you see one for the first time? I shook my head. They're perfect, still, calm, and at peace. No internal struggle. They're kind of beautiful. So I have to wait till I'm dead to feel peaceful? Well, that's one way, my therapist mused. Or else accept that you are imperfect in an imperfect world, and the two cancel each other out. The head was definitely faster than the heart on this one. Years later in Berlin, I read a book by Mark Manson called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***. Mark's point is basically, you can't give a f*** about everything. You only have a limited number of f***s to give in this life, and you have to give a f*** about something. So choose the things that are actually really important to you and give the few f***s that you have to those. I was still at the stage of working out what was important to me. At the end of his book, though, Mark writes about how he realized the place of perfection he was striving for was a complete illusion. He'd never be perfect. And why would you want to be, he wrote. It takes all the fun out of life. Like me, he'd been treating it as a destination. I'd embarked on this journey as an explorer and astronaut, still thinking that I'd reach a promised land and begin life anew. That land, though, does not exist. There is no planet happy. I finally grasped that the destination was me. Imperfect and always evolving. Which meant my old foe, patience, would become kind of irrelevant. Because if there was no endpoint, I wouldn't be sitting in the backseat of the car asking, are we there yet? Instead, I'd be sitting in the driver's seat with my hands off the wheel, surrendering to the road as it unfolded and taking in the view. Being imperfect is perfection itself. Now, if I could just do that, I thought.
I love that last line because it still shows that like working to embrace that imperfection, there's still a creeping perfectionism to even wanting to do that right. And,
yes.
And this is a lesson. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's like that's a line in there that the head was definitely faster than the heart on this one. Actually, that same person that sent me the bottle cap lid, Catherine, she had also said that to me, that, the head is faster than the heart. And so often in this journey, intellectually, I would get something and I would understand it, but it takes longer for you to feel it. And it's only once you're feeling it that it feels like it's in action in your life. But, that's the trip. That's what you sign up for. And having to have like a bit of, cut yourself a break when you know something, but you don't feel it yet. Knowing it's the first step. At least you know it now. And just give it some time, because time is also the one ingredient that you cannot fake. Just give it some time and it will land. But you have to be patient with it.
Yeah, it reminds me of something a friend told me, which is not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like so often, and this applies in work too and in other things, is like sometimes you can just get completely frozen up with this image of perfection, and you never just get around to just doing the thing you need to do, because you're letting the perfect become the enemy of something that would be good otherwise. Yeah,
100%. I mean, I've found since then, I used to have this. I mean, a real perfectionist in me that I've indulged my entire life. Like if I wasn't doing perfectly, then if I wasn't doing it 100, I don't want to do it at 99. Then it's a failure. Whereas now I look and think, this is fine. This is great. This is good enough. I'm enjoying it. And I think one of the problems with phone culture and the way everything is rated online, with Google reviews and Yelp and everything, there is a perception out there that there is the best, the absolute, the number one experience with to eat, to see. There's the absolute perfect person out there. And it's just not true.
Yeah.
There's nothing. Perfection it's all relative, So if you can just accept that, this is pretty great, and I'm just going to enjoy it for what it is, or I'm going to do this job to the point where, that's good enough, and everyone's going to be happy with that. Great, I can let that go now. So liberating.
Yeah, it is. And there's a beautiful scene in the book, and I won't say too much about it because I want people to read this book, and I want to leave this scene for them to discover. But there's a scene in an airport where you really come to yourself, and it's one of the biggest revelatory moments.
Yes.
The reason I bring that up is because it's an epiphany that you have alone in an airport picking up a friend, right? But you're standing there alone.
Yes.
But at the same time, that epiphany never would have happened without all the people that you connected with in order to get there. So there's a celebration of individualism here, of like finding yourself and being authentic. But your book is also so full of the recognition that those individual epiphanies, the idea of personal authenticity, is never really disconnected and can't really happen without other people. And so that's the paradox of like individualism and being connected to other people. And your book does such a good job of showing how friends make such a difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, friends make a huge difference, and really all the people that I met along the way. And I think this is something that often people are scared to set out on a journey, or to break with the life that they have, or to change something and go to a place that they desire to go, or pursue something they desire, because they think, I don't know how to do it. I won't know what to do. That fear of the unknown is so terrifying. But when you start, as I did, to get to this point that we've been talking about, the right people pop up at the right time with the right wisdom, and the solutions you find aren't handed to you as a ready-made boxed up solution, but you get all the right bits, and you're the one that actually figures it out, how it all fits together for you at the end.
Yeah.
So, if anyone is out there and thinking about, something they're wanting to do, but they're afraid of the unknown, just go. It will not be unknown while you're in it. It will feel a little strange. You'll be out of your element, but it feels good because you're like, I feel like I'm alive.
Yeah.
Because I'm on a path somewhere to somewhere that I want to go, and it'll all make sense when I look backwards, but you can enjoy each of the steps along the way as well. These friends, like you say, and these guides that pop up, and the knowledge that you gain.
Yeah, I loved seeing, like, for example, the divorced straight guys that, like, you felt a little disconnected from the gay community. Like, you went to a gay bar once with a friend, and like someone came up and was like, "Are you the divorced guy?" And it wasn't it was basically like, "What the hell, dude?" It wasn't like a good feeling. But then you had divorced guys that were just coming over to you, straight guys that were like, "Hey, bro, come here. Like, let me give you a hug, man."
I mean, that was incredible. Those guys saved my life. The guy I called James in the book was the first one I met. He was a divorced guy at work, and he was famous in my office. He'd gone for a brutal divorce, and I there's a point in the book where I went to him desperate, you know, because I was like, I don't know who else to ask because no one in our community had any experience with them. And so I went to him and I just was like, hey man, like I heard you went through a terrible divorce and I'm going through one right now. And when he swung around in his chair and he looked at me, he went, oh bro, I'm so sorry. It was like, oh, thank God someone understands. And he was like, what do you need to know? What do you need to know? And, you know, at that, and I asked him some, you know, specifically for the worst thing that was happening to me on that day.
Yeah.
But those guys came with like knowledge, wisdom, tactics, support. This is how you find a lawyer. This is how you use a lawyer. All these things that you had no idea about when you started in divorce. You don't know.
No.
But these guys know because they've all been through it. And that community has had a long history with divorce. So those guys were incredible. And that was, I write about that in How to Burn a Rainbow, that it felt like I joined Fight Club.
Yeah.
Because having a ring on my finger and the kind of equality I felt in society felt great when I was married. But it paled in comparison to the brotherhood that I found with those guys. And as a byproduct of that, which I never expected, I lost my lifelong fear and mistrust of straight men. You know, I'd always hang back a couple of degrees every time I meet a new one. I'm like, are you a cool one or are you one of the ones that wants to kill us? And you're like, you're waiting. You're like, show yourself, you know, and that was gone now, completely gone. And also, I would say this is that the idea of what it is to be a man in society has changed so much in their lifetimes. It's no surprise that you see a lot of, you know, lost heterosexual guys gravitating to these kind of extreme, you know, misogynist and sexist points of view because they're like, well, at least that person's standing for something. And I get it. I could follow that. But it's tapping into the worst parts of us.
Exactly. That's why we need healthier models of masculinity. I think your book navigated that element of it well, of like fostering a healthy masculinity, acknowledging some of the problems that push people to those extremes, but offering different paths away from those extremes and kind of inviting men in general down those different paths. So
thank you.
Yeah. It's not just for gay audiences. This book's independently published in part because it's so hard to convince publishers that there's an audience and a market for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I actually encountered something quite interesting when I was going through the publishing process. I was fortunate enough to get a meeting with a very big agent in New York. She reps a couple of friends of mine. And she was fantastic because she really laid it out for me. And she explained the way the publishing industry thinks is that, you know, she said, look, you know, and she read it and she said, your book's excellent. Like, you've got a great voice on the page. I can tell it's going to be a fantastic story. But I'm not going to represent you. And anyone who says they will is probably not very good at their job. And I'll explain why. And I was like, okay. She said the three hardest genres to sell are LGBTQ plus, divorce, and memoirs by people who aren't famous. And you've combined all three into one book. And to her credit, she said, prove me wrong. I really hope you prove me wrong. But this book looks like, to me, like it's dead in the water because the wisdom in my industry says only divorcing gay men are going to buy it. And I said, you know, in response, I said to her, look, but I don't need to be a divorced woman from Connecticut to read Eat, Pray, Love and get an incredible amount out of that book. But what I discovered later, her advice was self-publish and get a publicist. But what I discovered later is there is a perception out there in the world, in greater society, that they do not believe that they have anything to learn from us, that LGBTQ plus people are here for their entertainment and not their education. And that is the single biggest thing I've come up against because the fact that it's a gay divorce is what makes the story fresh.
Yeah, exactly.
For a lot of people. But unfortunately, it also gets classed as a gay divorce book. And I've found it's been incredibly difficult to get people past that. Like what you discover is that if you write a book about like a gay perspective on anything, that the genre of the book is now gay, not relationships, not spiritual, not life advice. It's gay and therefore goes in that box. That's a book written by one of them for them lot. And interestingly, even if you go on Amazon, you'll see every genre of book, including LGBTQ plus. And then when you click that, it's every genre of book, but like the LGBTQ plus version. Somehow we're in our own special little box. which I think is a mistake.
I do too.
It's a real mistake.
And I think like queer people, non-binary folks, trans folks, gay folks have spent a long time in their lives learning from and enjoying media and books and things that represent hetero couples and seeing how that stuff can be applied to their own lives. Like that's sort of things people have to do out of necessity. Whereas if you're part of the mainstream, you're not often, especially if you're white, like I'm a white guy, so like I have to go seek out, media by people of color and things that aren't the default, and then say, actually, this is awesome because I am learning new things and new perspectives, but there's also so much in here that resonates with me and that I can connect to. But I think like minority folks have kind of been doing that their whole lives because of the mainstreaming of cis, white, hetero culture.
100%. 100%. In fact, one of the books, it didn't actually make it in the final edit of the book, in the final published version. But for a while, I had a part in there where I referenced a British author called Renée Lodge, who wrote a book called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And when I read her book, which is about being a black woman in Britain, and her talking about the racism that she encounters, I'm reading it and going, yep, I get that. Oh, 100%, totally. And what you begin to realize is we compartmentalize each other all the time.
Yeah.
And we have a perceived idea of what these little compartments and the people in them are like. And what we allow them to produce from that lands on mainstream culture that we'll consume. But only this kind of thing from you lot. We don't want any of the other bits. But what you discover is really like when I can read a book by Renée Lodge about, being a black woman in Britain and about racism, I can read that as a gay man and go, I understand that completely. Yeah. I've also felt that. I've also encountered that. And you realize we will never walk in each other's shoes. We'll never know what it's like to be each other. But we are walking down a lot of the same roads.
Yeah.
And that's what we're missing out on when we just focus so much on our differences and what sets us apart, as opposed to actually what connects us as human beings.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes even the differences can put something in starker contrast for me, where I'm like, so he went through that. This is kind of how it's working in my context. That's really interesting. And now I can actually see it as kind of a thing I can work with or do something different about because I'm like, it didn't necessarily have to be this way. So even the differences, let alone the similarities, I think are worth people's time. I wanted to make one more observation. You mentioned James, and there's one more final lesson I want to point out. James was at work, and you talk a lot about your work life. We didn't really touch on it here, but you had a career and you were making a lot of money, but you were like, oh no, like, are you going to have to give up half of your income? And that's what Gunnar was fighting for. And so you're thinking, maybe I should get out of this. And then the lawyers are saying, well, if you do that, we're still going to make you pay anyway to sustain the same level of expected living. So it's this whole problem. And you were really bringing it at work sometimes, just feeling it. And you learned a lesson is to be mindful of the toll that you exact on other people as you are learning. So you realize, like, I'm actually kind of doing this a little too much. Like, I need to pace myself and be also mindful of not just coworkers, but friends, of how much I'm leaning on them and be responsible about that.
I mean, I was awful when my divorce started. There's a point in the book where I had to go back and apologize to everybody that I worked with for my behavior and how I had been in the first 3 months of my divorce, because it comes on you so quick. There's this person that you're married to, and then the next, like literally within a week, you're going to war with them. Your entire life is being turned upside down. Your finances, your housing, your, like everything. There's not a facet of your life that divorce.
Your beloved pets, the little kitty cat that you had to let go. That was so sad.
My little Francine. Yes. But like everything about your life is being completely destroyed in front of your eyes, and you're still having to turn up to work. And I was the boss, And I was going on these tirades at work about what my lawyers were doing and my ex-husband. And no one's going to tell me, shut up, man, because I'm the boss, right? Well, until my friend Uli came to work with us on a job, and he was the one who turned around to me and he's like, you need to shut up about your goddamn divorce. Like, everyone's sick of hearing about it.
Yeah, and they can't tell you.
I mean, and they can't tell you. And I was terrible. And I think, if you're going through a divorce, it's good to let people know.
Yeah.
But my God, don't give them the daily diatribes. There are people who you can do that with. Like you might have a friend you can do that with. You might have a therapist or whatever it is. Do not unload on your coworkers, because your divorce then starts affecting them, their moods, their productivity. Your divorce is not their fault and is not their problem. Yeah. Don't make them. And if people do ask you, how's it going? Answer in a tweet.
Yeah,
give them a tweet-sized response. Yeah. Don't make them regret that they asked, because 10 minutes later you're still going on about it.
And maybe they'll follow up too. Like maybe they'll want to dig out more, but you're giving them the basics.
Let them ask.
Yeah.
Let them ask. Yeah. No, I mean, I was wild. Absolutely wild. But also, it's a sad and unfortunate thing that there are no workplace services or support for people going through divorces, separations, or the end of long-term relationships.
Yeah, you'd have to take personal time. It's not like there's bereavement time, but that's for someone's death and stuff like that. Or you say people are excited for like marriage. Like if you're getting married, cool, enjoy the honeymoon. But if you're getting divorced, there's not a thing of like, all right, we need to like figure out how to make time work for you and be flexible around this. That was a great point you make about how the workplace is not built to facilitate divorce the way it is for something like a death or for marriage or whatever. Yeah.
At all. And I would actually say to anyone who's listening who's like high up in a company, like that is not just dangerous for your employee, for the morale of anyone who has to work with them, but it's dangerous for business. Yeah. Like I was a loose cannon. I mean, people can read about like the depths that I'd plummeted into. Insomnia. Like I was at work and I was thinking, I don't think I've slept in 2 days.
Yeah.
And, self-medicating, not eating well, not sleeping, paranoid, anxious. And I'm running a multi-million-dollar global business. That is not good business sense. But my office, my employees, I'm not angry at them, my employers, because they were just doing what standard procedure was, which is nothing.
Yep.
Because there isn't a standard procedure. Corporate America really needs to have a good look at what they're doing there, because there are some places that are so advanced they're even offering pet bereavement or paid menstrual leave. Excellent. We should absolutely have those things. But man, this affects 64% of people in their working lives. Help them out. Help them out.
See, again, this book speaks to so many different issues that I think anyone experiencing relationship problems or divorce can relate to. And there's also a lot of new things that you invite people to consider as a gay author. It's How to Burn a Rainbow. It's a terrific book, Karl.
Thank you.
Okay, let's close with our final segment, Regrets, Challenges, and Surprises. You can pick 1, 2, or all 3, something that you would change about the book, or what the most challenging part of writing it was, or what surprised you about the process of creating it.
It's a great question. Well, I don't really do regret these days. I think regret is kind of based on the idea that if only I'd done this one thing back then, things would be better now, which you don't know. Like you can't actually know that. That's just a fantasy. But I'd say the biggest surprise for me is the kinds of people it's connecting to and what they're finding in it. And what's been wonderful is when someone writes to you and they tell you what's going on in their life and the part of the book that they read that really helped them with that, you learn more about what your book is as an author. And I think actually, the biggest surprise was for me, and I didn't know this until after I published it, once you publish it, a book is not yours anymore. It belongs to everybody who reads it. You have your relationship with it, but you don't own it now. It's just something that came through you, that you put in the world, and now it belongs to everybody else. And that was a nice surprise, a very nice surprise, actually. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Karl, thanks so much for talking to us about the book. This has been a great conversation. I loved reading it. It's a page turner. Like it was so good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And what a great interview. I've really enjoyed this one, mate. Thank you so much, Blair.
Thanks for listening to Relationscapes. We're mapping the stories and ideas that shape who we are and how we connect with each other in order to build a more just world. Before I go, I wanted to read this review that came in through Apple Podcasts. It says, Relationscapes is one of my favorites. I can always count on Blair to conduct thoughtful interviews with his guests. I believe we can all relate to the topics discussed in Relationscapes and have our worldviews expanded to be more inclusive. Well, that's exactly the goal. Who wrote that? Let me see. This was Bring It On With the Fire. You can rate and review the show. Just go to Apple Podcasts. You can also rate it in Spotify. It means a lot to get feedback. I love hearing from listeners about what they're enjoying. Mates of State provided our theme song. Relationscapes is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. I'm journalist Blair Hodges, and I'll see you again soon.
Coming up on Season 12 of Two Lives, we'll meet Susan Liu, who, in searching for answers about her mother's death, produced and performed a one-woman show.
She was a silent secret, and now she's exalted, and we can talk about her, yes, tragic story, yes, full of shame. And also, when we name that shame, we can be liberated. If we're not stuck in the past, we can let it go. We can heal the past.
And we'll meet Elise D'Alessandro. After years of being bullied and fat-shamed, she posted a photo of herself in a bikini that launched a movement.
She was like, just post it. And I was like, I can't just post it. I can't. And she was like, just post it. Like, what's the worst that could happen? The truth is, my whole life changed.
All of that and more is coming up this season on Two Lives. Listen for new episodes every other Tuesday.